10 Forgotten Meals Every Family in the 1950s Ate Weekly is not just a title. It is a doorway into a world where simple food held families together. Every home in that decade relied on affordable, reliable dishes that showed up on the table week after week, shaping routines, memories, and the rhythm of American life. Today on America's Lost Recipes, I am taking you back into those kitchens to revisit the meals that fed millions and quietly defined an era. Before we start, make sure you subscribe to America's Lost Recipes, because I uncover dishes that history has almost erased, and each episode reveals another piece of the country's forgotten food story. What you are about to hear matters. These meals tell us how families survived, how they celebrated, and how they found comfort in hard times. Stick with this video because every dish on this list unlocks a different chapter of 1950s life, and the final ones may surprise you the most. Meatloaf with mashed potatoes. Meatloaf with mashed potatoes was more than a dinner. In the 1950s, it worked like a weekly ritual that families trusted. It showed up because it was affordable, predictable, and always tasted the same no matter who cooked it. Every slice carried the feeling of a calm evening after long workdays, when families gathered around the table without rush or noise. This meal became a steady anchor in a decade that prized routine and stability, and it earned a place on almost every weekly menu across the country. Most families stretched ground beef with breadcrumbs, onions, and a simple seasoning mix that reflected their own household habits. The loaf was pressed into a pan, glazed with a thin layer of ketchup, and baked until the edges darkened slightly. That aroma drifting through the house signaled that the day was nearly done and dinner was close. It was the kind of smell that made children hurry to wash their hands and adults pause whatever they were doing for a moment of quiet comfort. Mashed potatoes completed this pairing with the kind of warmth that only homemade food can give. Potatoes were peeled, boiled, and whipped with butter and milk until they reached the soft, steady texture that families associated with home. This side dish balanced the meal with something creamy and familiar, and it helped stretch the dinner so that everyone had enough. What made meatloaf so important was not complexity. It was the way it fit into daily life. It fed large families without demanding expensive ingredients. It tasted the same whether it was Tuesday or Sunday. It became part of memories, part of routines, and part of a decade defined by reliability. When people say the 1950s felt stable, this humble meal is one reason why. Creamed chipped beef on toast. Creamed chipped beef on toast was a weekly staple in 1950s households because it delivered comfort, speed, and unmistakable nostalgia. Families relied on it during busy evenings when dinner needed to appear on the table without delay. This dish, often called creamed dried beef, combined practicality with a flavor that felt warm and steady, making it a reliable favorite across the country. Most homes kept jars or packets of dried beef tucked in the pantry. It lasted long, required no refrigeration, and fit tight budgets, which made it ideal for the decade's everyday cooking habits. The beef was sliced into thin strips and simmered in a simple cream sauce made from butter, flour, and milk. As the mixture thickened, it transformed into a silky gravy that carried a gentle salty richness. Nothing about it felt fancy, but it offered the kind of satisfaction families needed at the end of long days. The toast mattered just as much as the sauce. Slices of white bread were toasted to a light crisp, creating a base strong enough to hold the creamy mixture. When the sauce was poured over the toast, it softened slightly but still kept its structure, creating a balance of textures that 1950s families loved. It was the kind of meal that could be served for dinner, lunch, or even a late-night bite after children had gone to bed. What made this dish a weekly repeat was its sense of familiarity. It tasted the same every time, and that predictability gave families a small moment of reassurance. In an era shaped by routine and structure, creamed chipped beef on toast fit perfectly into the rhythm of daily life. It reminded people that even simple food could feel comforting, dependable, and worth revisiting week after week. Tuna noodle casserole. Tuna noodle casserole became one of the most dependable weekly meals in 1950s kitchens because it offered comfort, convenience, and a sense of togetherness that families valued deeply. It was a dish built from pantry ingredients, which made it ideal for a decade where stretching every dollar mattered. Almost every household kept canned tuna, egg noodles, and condensed soup on hand, and those simple items formed a meal that felt warm and familiar. The dish usually began with a can of tuna mixed into a bowl of cooked noodles. Condensed cream of mushroom soup tied everything together, creating a smooth, savory base that required no extra effort. Some families added peas for a pop of color and sweetness, while others sprinkled crushed crackers or breadcrumbs on top to form a light crust as it baked. Nothing in this casserole demanded precision, which made it friendly for busy parents who needed dinner ready without stress. Once placed in the oven, the casserole slowly transformed into something comforting. The noodles absorbed the sauce, the tuna spread its gentle flavor through the dish, and the topping crisped just enough to add contrast. That moment when the casserole emerged from the oven, warm and bubbling at the edges, felt like a reward after long afternoons filled with work, school, and daily chores. Families appreciated this meal for more than its simplicity. It filled the house with a mild, homey aroma that signaled everyone it was time to gather. Children knew exactly what to expect when they saw the dish on the table, and adults valued how far it could stretch to feed a full household. Over time, tuna noodle casserole became part of the country's shared memory, reminding people of evenings when life felt structured, calm, and safe. Salisbury steak with onion gravy. Salisbury steak with onion gravy was a cornerstone of 1950s weekly dinners, offering both hearty flavor and practical affordability. Families turned to this dish because it transformed modest ground beef into a satisfying, restaurant-style meal without leaving the kitchen. Its presence on the table was reassuring, a sign that the evening would bring warmth, fullness, and comfort. The steak itself was a simple mixture of ground beef, breadcrumbs, egg, and seasonings. Shaped into individual patties, it was lightly browned on the stovetop before being simmered in a rich onion gravy. Onions were sliced thin and caramelized slowly, releasing a natural sweetness that balanced the savory depth of the beef. Milk or broth often enriched the gravy, creating a smooth, flavorful sauce that clung to every bite. In many households, a dash of Worcestershire sauce or mustard deepened the flavor, but even the simplest versions were enough to impress. Salisbury steak's appeal lay in its combination of textures and aromas. The slightly crisped edges of the patty contrasted with the tender interior, while the gravy added a silky coating that made the dish feel luxurious despite its modest ingredients. This meal was usually served alongside mashed potatoes or buttered noodles, which absorbed the flavorful sauce and completed the comforting plate. What made Salisbury steak so consistent on weekly menus was its reliability. It could be prepared quickly or made in larger batches to feed a family throughout the week. Children and adults alike recognized its taste instantly, and it carried a sense of home that few dishes could replicate. More than just food, it represented the 1950s approach to family dinners: practical, flavorful, and designed to keep everyone together around the table week after week. Chicken and dumplings. Chicken and dumplings was a weekly comfort meal in 1950s homes because it provided warmth, sustenance, and familiarity in equal measure. Families turned to this dish not for flair, but because it transformed simple ingredients into a hearty dinner capable of feeding every household member. It became a staple because it stretched inexpensive cuts of chicken into a filling meal while offering flavors that felt timeless and reassuring. The dish began with a pot of chicken simmering slowly in water or stock, often with onions, carrots, and celery. This base created a flavorful broth that formed the heart of the meal. The dumplings were made from a basic dough of flour, baking powder, salt, and milk, rolled or dropped by spoonfuls into the simmering liquid. As they cooked, the dumplings expanded slightly, absorbing some of the broth while remaining soft and tender. By the time the dish was ready, the chicken was fall-apart tender, and the dumplings carried the subtle essence of the broth. Every household had a slightly different approach. Some added butter or a touch of cream to the dumplings for richness, while others relied on the natural flavors of the vegetables and chicken. The combination of tender chicken, thick broth, and pillowy dumplings created a meal that was satisfying in every way, from aroma to taste to texture. What made chicken and dumplings a weekly favorite was its ability to feed a family efficiently. It required minimal ingredients but offered maximum comfort. The dish symbolized home, stability, and care, everything families wanted after a day filled with work and chores. It was a meal that encouraged everyone to gather, linger, and appreciate the simple pleasures of shared food. In 1950s kitchens, chicken and dumplings was more than a dish. It was tradition on a plate, a reminder that even modest ingredients could create lasting memories. Baked macaroni and cheese. Baked macaroni and cheese was a weekly ritual in 1950s kitchens, cherished for its simplicity, affordability, and comforting flavor. Families served it because it transformed a few basic ingredients, pasta, cheese, milk, and butter, into a dish that felt indulgent yet practical. It was familiar, filling, and carried the unmistakable scent of home that lingered in the air for hours. The dish began with elbow macaroni cooked until tender. A smooth cheese sauce was prepared by melting butter, whisking in flour to form a roux, and gradually adding milk to create a creamy base. Cheddar cheese, grated or shredded, was mixed in, creating a rich sauce that clung to every noodle. The pasta and sauce were combined in a baking dish, often topped with additional cheese or breadcrumbs for a lightly crisped surface. Once baked, the top layer browned slightly, adding texture to the otherwise creamy meal beneath. Families appreciated baked macaroni and cheese for more than flavor. It stretched easily, feeding large households without requiring expensive ingredients. Leftovers were equally satisfying, reheating well and maintaining their comforting texture. Children loved the gooey, cheesy consistency, while adults valued the way it could be prepared quickly after a busy day. What made this dish a weekly favorite was its versatility. It could be paired with vegetables, a small meat portion, or eaten on its own. In 1950s homes, baked macaroni and cheese represented consistency and care, an effortless way to provide nourishment and reassurance. Every spoonful reminded families that home-cooked meals could be both simple and memorable, and that even the humblest ingredients could become something special when prepared with attention and love. This casserole captured the essence of the decade, practical, comforting, and designed to bring families together around the table. Pot roast with root vegetables. Pot roast with root vegetables was a central feature of 1950s weekly dinners, admired for its heartiness, simplicity, and ability to feed the entire family without strain. In an era when efficiency and practicality guided home cooking, this dish offered both substance and comfort, making it a reliable choice for households across the country. It became a weekly tradition because it combined affordability with a sense of occasion, signaling that a nourishing meal awaited at the end of the day. The preparation began with a cut of beef, often a chuck roast, seared on the stovetop to lock in juices and develop rich flavor. It was then placed in a heavy pot or roasting pan alongside carrots, potatoes, onions, and occasionally parsnips. Seasoning was modest. Salt, pepper, and bay leaves were often enough. Water or broth was added to cover the ingredients partially, and the pot was covered and slow-cooked. Hours of gentle simmering allowed the meat to become tender, the vegetables to soften, and the flavors to meld into a fragrant, savory blend. Families appreciated pot roast not only for its taste but also for its practicality. Leftovers were easy to reheat, and the slow cooking method required little supervision, allowing parents to focus on other household tasks. The aroma that filled the home while the roast cooked was equally important, signaling warmth, stability, and a sense of care that went beyond nourishment. Pot roast with root vegetables symbolized the 1950s approach to family meals: simple, reliable, and communal. Every bite reinforced the idea that home-cooked food could provide comfort and security. It represented consistency in a time when routines mattered, offering both physical sustenance and emotional reassurance. For families in the 1950s, this dish was more than dinner. It was a weekly ritual, a marker of togetherness, and a cornerstone of home life. Hamburger pie. Hamburger pie became a staple in 1950s weekly dinners because it combined affordability, convenience, and a sense of familiarity that families cherished. Ground beef, one of the era's most versatile ingredients, was transformed into a hearty, satisfying dish that required minimal effort but delivered maximum comfort. It was a meal that could feed an entire household without straining the budget, which made it a go-to choice for busy families. The base of hamburger pie was simple. Ground beef was browned with onions and lightly seasoned with salt and pepper. Some households added vegetables such as peas or carrots, stretching the dish further while introducing mild sweetness and color. A creamy sauce, often made from condensed soup, tied the ingredients together and created a moist, flavorful filling. The mixture was then poured into a pie crust, either homemade or store-bought, and baked until golden on top. The aroma of warm beef and onions filling the kitchen became a signal that comfort and satisfaction awaited at the dinner table. Hamburger pie offered more than just taste. Its layered structure made it visually appealing, while the soft, flaky crust added texture that contrasted with the rich filling. Children eagerly anticipated the bubbling center, and adults appreciated how easy it was to prepare after a long day. Leftovers could be reheated, retaining flavor and structure, making it an efficient meal for families with busy schedules. What made hamburger pie a weekly tradition was its reliability. Every serving delivered warmth, fullness, and familiarity. It represented home cooking at its most practical yet comforting, showing how simple ingredients could be transformed into a meal that felt special. In the 1950s, families depended on such dishes to provide nourishment, stability, and a sense of togetherness. Hamburger pie was not just food, it was part of the rhythm of daily life, a dish that quietly shaped memories and defined weekly routines. Chicken pot pie. Chicken pot pie was a cherished weekly meal in 1950s homes, prized for its hearty filling, comforting warmth, and reliable appeal. Families turned to this dish because it combined leftover or inexpensive chicken with vegetables and a simple crust to create a meal that was both nourishing and satisfying. It became a staple because it offered consistency, flavor, and a sense of care in every bite. Preparation began with cooked chicken, often shredded from a roasted bird or leftover boiled chicken. The meat was combined with vegetables such as carrots, peas, and potatoes, all simmered in a creamy sauce made from butter, flour, and milk or broth. Seasoning remained straightforward: salt, pepper, and sometimes a hint of herbs such as thyme or parsley. The filling was poured into a pie dish, topped with either a rolled pastry crust or biscuit-style dough, and baked until golden brown. As the crust crisped, the savory aroma of chicken and vegetables filled the home, signaling that dinner was ready. Families valued chicken pot pie for its practicality. It stretched ingredients to feed multiple people while offering a balanced meal in one dish. The combination of tender chicken, soft vegetables, and flaky crust created layers of texture that appealed to children and adults alike. Leftovers were simple to reheat, making it ideal for busy households seeking efficiency without sacrificing flavor. What made this dish a weekly favorite was its role in family life. It was more than food, it was comfort, routine, and a demonstration of care. Every bite reminded families of evenings spent together, of work completed, and of stability found in familiar meals. Chicken pot pie exemplified 1950s home cooking, practical, flavorful, and designed to bring people together. For many households, it became an emblem of weekly tradition, quietly shaping memories that endured long after the decade passed. Fried bologna sandwiches. Fried bologna sandwiches were a surprisingly common weekly meal in 1950s homes because they combined simplicity, flavor, and affordability. Families relied on bologna as an inexpensive source of protein that could be transformed into a satisfying, warm sandwich with just a few pantry staples. While it may seem humble today, in the 1950s it was a practical, dependable meal that appeared on tables across the country. The preparation was straightforward. Slices of bologna were placed in a hot skillet and fried until the edges browned and the center became slightly crisp. The sizzling meat released a savory aroma that filled the kitchen, signaling that dinner was near. Bread, usually white sandwich bread, was toasted lightly or left soft, then layered with the fried bologna. Many households added a thin spread of mustard, mayonnaise, or even a slice of cheese, creating a combination of flavors that felt rich despite the dish's modest ingredients. Fried bologna sandwiches were beloved for their immediacy and adaptability. They could be made in minutes, required little cleanup, and satisfied both children and adults. Leftover sandwiches could be packed for lunch the next day, maintaining their flavor even after cooling slightly. The dish offered both convenience and comfort, which made it perfect for the busy post-war family schedules of the 1950s. What made this meal a weekly favorite was not just the taste, but the ritual it represented. Families gathered around the table for something quick yet reliable, and children associated the aroma of frying bologna with home, care, and togetherness. In 1950s kitchens, simplicity was a virtue, and fried bologna sandwiches demonstrated that even basic ingredients could create meaningful memories. It was an emblem of practical home cooking, a dish that nourished bodies and reflected the rhythm of daily life during the decade. This concludes the 10 forgotten meals every family in the 1950s ate weekly.